Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Hour of Devastation spoilers, and I think things are starting to wind down a little bit for the spoiler season. We have a few cards to talk about today, but nothing super crazy. Regardless, let's jump right into it for the card that I think is probably the sweetest revealed today, and that is Hour of Promise. So, for 5 mana, you get to tutor for 2 lands from your library, put them on the battlefield tapped, then if you control 3 or more deserts, you get 2/2/2 zombie tokens. So this card is really interesting. I think the main power of this card is in the fact that it doesn't say basic lands. You get to search for any lands. So theoretically, this means you can search up all kinds of busted things, not so much in standard, but in older formats. So let's kind of break down what this does. In standard, I think you really need the desert clause to work for the card to be good. Just casting this and getting 2 random lands for 5 mana is a little below the curve as far as ramping is concerned, but if you manage to have a deck that has enough deserts, and desert tribal is a thing, then Hour of Promise is super good, because 2 lands and 2 zombies is actually a pretty good deal. Right now, at the top of our desert curve, we have Hostile Desert and Scavenger Grounds are probably the 2 most powerful, but there are a lot of deserts in standard, so it will be possible to use this and get the zombies. The question is it going to be worth playing a lot of lands that enter tapped and don't do a whole lot to make Hour of Promise work? And I don't think we know yet. It's possible, but we gotta wait and see. However, the card is super exciting in older formats. In Modern, for example, we can use it to just tutor up our Tron pieces. We only need 1 Tron piece on the battlefield, and we get the other 2, we have Tron. So that's maybe a little slow for the current build of the deck, but there's a lot of possibilities. There's been a lot of powerful lands printed over Magic's history, and being able to search out non-basics is a really huge swing. We see this in Commander in specific, where people are already playing stuff like Explosive Vegetation, already playing Sylvan Scrying, and this kind of combines together both of those effects. You get the double ramp of Explosive Vegetation, but you get the lack of conditions, like with Sylvan Scrying, so I'm pretty sure this is just a straight up staple in Commander, even without the Desert Clause. You're not going to play deserts. Maybe you play like 1 or 2 of them, the Graveyard Hate one maybe, just because it's good anyway, but you're not going to play it because it makes zombies. You're going to play it because you can tutor up degenerate lands. The first thing that popped to mind when I saw this was, oh, that's a way you can just get Cabal Coffers and Urborg, means you're untapping the next turn with oodles and oodles of mana, which is really insane. But even beyond that, you know, Bajuka Bogs, Strip Mines, Amirias, there's tons of possibilities since you can get non-basic lands with this. So maybe in Standard, if we find a way to make deserts work, probably not in Modern, but I'm not going to write it off completely, because the ability to get non-basics is super good. And definitely an all-star in Commander, where there's just so many sweet lands to get, and other similar cards, like Explosive Vegetation, which isn't that much cheaper, are already very heavily played in the format. Moving on our list, we have Holo one, and this card is pretty interesting. So 5 mana, you get a 4/4. Doesn't sound that exciting. It does have cycling, which is nice, so you can always play it in a cycling theme deck, but it gets cheaper for every card that you've discarded or cycled this turn. So if you can cycle 1 card, it's a 3 mana 4/4. If you can cycle 2 cards, it's a 1 mana 4/4. If you can cycle or discard 3 cards, it's literally free. So in Standard, I think the easiest way to abuse this is with discard. With cycling, it's a little rough, because if you think about cycling, it's going to cost 1 or 2 mana, so even at its cheapest, like you cycle a Censor, you're spending a total of 4 mana to get a 4/4, which isn't that great. I mean, a vanilla 4/4 for 4 isn't a standard playable card. On the other hand, you can do some sweet curve things and kind of build your own Loxodon Smiter. If you have a Ravenous Bloodseeker, a Stromkirk Condemned, another free discard outlet, you can play those on turn 2, discard a card on turn 3, play it for 3 mana, and a 3 mana 4/4 is big. We see Loxodon Smiter seeing play all the way back to Modern, and it does have some upside upsides, but for the most part, it's played because it's really big for its mana cost, so building our own hollowed one might be good enough for certain builds in Standard. The other option is to play it in a cycling deck, which is the easiest home. If you have New Perspectives, it's going to be insane. You cycle a bunch of cards, you cast it for free. It's only a 4/4, and New Perspectives doesn't come down until turn 6, so on turn 6, a hollowed one really isn't that game-breaking. But even with like Archfiend of Ifnir and other cycling payoffs, it gives the deck another threat where you have a reasonable body, you can cycle it when it's not good, and occasionally on turn 5, you double cycle, play this for 1 mana, you drew some new cards with the cycling, and it's pretty sweet. In Modern, there's some weird possibilities. I'm pretty sure they aren't good enough, but you can do cool things with it. For example, on turn 2, you cast a Faithless Looting, you have a 1 mana hollowed one because you discard 2 cards. Burning Inquiry discards 3 cards and draws you 3 cards. Unfortunately, the discard is at random, so there's some inconsistency there, but it does give you free hollow one, so I don't know if there could be some crazy all-in hollow one deck taking advantage of these cheap discard effects in Modern. It seems like it would be a very fringe thing, probably not good enough, because the payoff is still just a 4/4. It still gets blocked by Tarmogoyf. It's still equivalent to a Grim Flayer that has Delirium turned on. So it's not like you're getting some insanely overpowered creature. You're just getting a reasonable creature for the cost. But a 2-mana 4/4 isn't that insane in Modern, especially when you have to build around it with Faithless Lootings and Burning Inquiries. But it's probably worth examining and can at least be like a sweet budget fun deck. Next up, we have Eminent Doom, which is a crazy enchantment and sort of the red version of As Foretold is, I think, the comparison that I see here. So it enters the battlefield with a Doom counter, and then whenever you cast a spell with the same converted mana cost as the number of Doom counters on it, you get to deal that much damage to a creature or player, equal to the number of Doom counters. So you cast a 1 mana play. After you play this, you get to deal 1 damage. Then it gets another counter, so it slowly builds up. So the challenge here is the card is just amazingly slow. You play it on turn 3, then you have to play a 1-drop on turn 3, turn 4, to just get 1 counter and deal 1 damage, and then it has these weird curve requirements. You have to cast a 2-drop next to make it do anything, then a 3-drop. So it's hard to imagine that it's going to be worth it. It's sort of maybe the way I see it, 5, 6, 7 damage, but it's going to be split across a whole bunch of turns and not be very consistent. So a 3-mana burn spell for 5 or 6 damage, when you put it that way, just doesn't sound that good. I mean, to look at the curve, what you're looking at is turn 3 Eminent Doom, turn 4 play Falcon Wrathgorger, deal 1 to your opponent. The next turn, or maybe the same turn, I guess, you can play a Harsh Mentor, deal 2 to your opponent. The next turn, on Crop Crasher, another 3-drop, deal 3 to your opponent. By that point, you're kind of the point where things are getting very odd and weird, and you're probably not going to have 4 drops, definitely not going to have 5, 6, 7, 8 drops. So I think it's a fun build around and an interesting deck building restriction and challenge kind of card, maybe an against the odds card, but I don't think that you just play this as an enchantment to deal damage. Even in an aggressive deck, in a control deck, you're going to have a hard time with the converted mana cost. So I don't think that it's really competitively playable, but it's really unique, and I like the flavor mirror image thing of As Foretold. Next, we have God-Pharoahs Gift, which, speaking of too expensive, this card is just way too much mana to see play in Standard. 7 mana, and you basically get to eternalize for free at the beginning of combat on your turn, and your eternalized creature gets haste. So this is powerful. You get a free 4/4 every turn. If it sits out for 3, 4, 5, 6 turns, and there's a lot of stuff in the graveyard, it can take over the game. And it's important to note that since it's a copy of the creature, you do get enter the battlefield abilities, which is why I think it could be sweet in Commander. Things die in Commander, people use graveyards, people like to play big enter the battlefield creatures, and if you're getting back free Terastodons, even as 4/4s, Primordials, Muldrifters, you can get a lot of value from the enter the battlefield triggers, and maybe it's worth it there. So I could definitely see this showing up in Commander, but it's just too much mana for any other format. Also worth noting, it's super sweet with Panharmonicon. We were just talking enter the battlefield triggers, and getting things back from the graveyard with enter the battlefield triggers, and then doubling them up gives you even more mana. So I could definitely imagine playing a God-Pharoahs Gift Panharmonicon deck in Commander, but I think that's the only place it really fits. Finally, getting to the bottom of the barrel, we have Maw of Chaos, and this card's just way too expensive. 7 mana 6/6, which is already a little below the curve, and then you basically get a Sweltering Suns, 3 damage to each other creature when it enters the battlefield. So it's hard to envision this card being playable anywhere. It is kind of the most intro pack rare I think that we've seen, even though intro packs are no longer a thing. But I guess I could see in a very specific format, if everyone's playing White Weenie and you build a Reanimator deck, I could see Maw of Chaos being right in that deck. If you can get it back, sweep the board, have a 6/6 left over with Ever After or Liliana's Zest Majesty, but that requires a ton of things to go right, and then I'm not even sure Maw of Chaos is the best reanimation target in that scenario, but that's the only place I can even see an argument for Maw of Chaos being playable in Standard. Last but not least, we get a bunch more lands, a bunch more desert lands, a cycle of uncommons. So these lands are interesting. They're all one-color lands that also tap for colorless mana. You gotta pay a life to get the colored mana, and then you can sack a desert to give it an ability. So I think this is certainly a sweet against the odds type deck. You could play like an all-land desert deck in Standard. It would be pretty fun, pretty interesting. Probably not very good. So the white one pumps your creatures, red one damages opponents, blue one mills, the black one lets you kill something by putting counters on it, and the green one gives you a giant growth effect. So it's important to note that you can do this by sacking any desert. So you don't have to sack the land itself, so it is kind of repeatable, but they're really slow, really expensive. The one place I could see these seeing play in Standard is as a replacement for the dual pain lands, which is one thing that these deserts do really well. They're lands that tap for colorless and tap for colored mana. We've seen a bit of an upswing with Eldrazi since the banning of Aetherworks Marvel, like mono-red Eldrazi decks, and a land like Ruminap Ruins is so insanely good for that deck. It's exactly what Eldrazi need. The downside is Eldrazi are rotating very shortly in September, but for the next 2 or 3 months, if you're playing an Eldrazi deck, you will definitely play these desert lands because they do exactly what you want. You can use them to cast your colored spells, use them to cast your Eldrazi spells, and life is good for Eldrazi. So I think we might see a slight upswing in Eldrazi over the next couple months, but over the long term, I think this is a fun desert tribal thing. Maybe there's specific decks that want them. I guess playing just Ruminap Ruins in a aggressive deck, it does come into play untapped. You're spending a bit of life, but it gives you a little bit of reach for a fairly low opportunity cost if you're playing like a burn deck or a red aggro deck. So we might see them here and there just for their own abilities, or maybe an against the odds desert deck. But for right now, mostly excited about the possibility of Eldrazi making a comeback before rotation. Anyway, that's been our daily Hour of Devastation spoilers for today. So what do you think? How good are these cards? What are you most excited about from today? Do we have anything today that can be standard playable, standard staple? Or are these just mostly commander cards, fun against the odds cards, budget magic cards, but not really tournament level constructed cards? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.